podcast from Drew and Mike is, I think it's really cool, and that is what I wanted to say.
Two and a mic. Two and a mic. When Flora suggested I should speak with her brother, I had no idea about the beautiful world of music that she was presenting to me. This episode is therefore going to follow a different structure to my usual episodes, because I have to follow the art. I cannot try to mold beauty to fit my purposes. Have a listen. You'll see exactly what I mean.
Omish Njash, Larry Dwayne, Gogni, Original. Eti jana nilikata sana, pombe tu za bure ziliraru bana. Sikupanga nilijipata mchana, mizinga kama sitasema shash wasichana. Kila kona bilane, 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 bilane. Kichabe kumoko bilane, 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 Gogne, bilane. Nyamalo kande koweche lichirangane. Pachote waketo gipesa tokara pimane. Kwetege yatdo, sigarabe, pokone. Chumbi nyiri wonya game Gogni mapokone. Pachalal chuchunya bende, bayo kaparo singo mani singa sechega bende kalo tuchunya lendo. Kati chwanya top beer, my dear poda heri kati keto na karia. Kongo niko ponda weyo bed buta. Party mate kiwok utajuta. Chini kwa chini nyetindo kama ko ukuta. Kasi bizwe chimoko terkucha. Eti jana nilikata sana, pombe tu za bure ziliraru bana. Sikupanga nilijipata mchana, mizinga kama sitasema shash wasichana. Kila kona bilane, 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 bilane. Kichabe kumoko bilane, 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 bilane. Angikoni kosangi.
Wow, that was amazing. This is a demo version of the song and is the first time it's been played publicly. I'm very grateful to artist Omish Njash for his permission to do so. Omish is a writer, a songwriter, a singer, film producer, journalist, photographer. He is a storyteller, an extremely talented storyteller. During this episode, a number of different parts will kick in to address some of the topics we wanted to cover in the first episode together. The initial flowing chat was interrupted, but we found a way to round up some of the issues we wanted to talk about. I really enjoyed listening to Omish, and to chat with him live was such a pleasure. One I hope to repeat because his voice, his words, the thoughtful pauses between every utterance speak volumes for who he is, and at the same time can only hint at the depth of the world his mind has the capacity to create and present. Thank you so much, Omish, for talking to me. Enjoy. I'm joined by Omish Njash from Nairobi City. Omish, it's a pleasure to have you here. How are you doing?
Fine. How you doing?
Yeah, good. First of all, I have to pass my gratitude on to Flora, who put us into contact with one another. So thanks a lot to her for that. She sent me a link which kind of talked about some of the things that you've done. And to be honest, it kind of blew me away. But yeah, do you want to give us a bit of a background as to who you are and all the talents that you've got as well?
Whoa, I usually dread that question. I usually dread being given that.
Sorry.
I'm bad at thumping my chest, but this is a podcast, so I guess we shall have to try.
Yeah. I'll help you along if you forget something that I've written on the list here. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd say nowadays I just call myself a storyteller because all the different things I do, sort of at their root, there's a story or there's a story I'm telling. And under the ambit of storytelling, I do all these various things. I write literature, I write articles of journalism, I make films, mostly short films. I make music, of which right now I'm working on a musical, a storytelling musical. And I also do theater. And of course, storytelling itself is a tradition. So uh, I ran an Airbnb experience until a couple of months ago, where I used to do storytelling to guests. So I'll share the one or two things I could add, but I think that's fair. That's fair for now. Oh, and I also play the nyatiti, which is a traditional Luo musical instrument.
Okay, what kind of instrument would that be comparable with, or is it completely unique
It is
in its?
no. It's a lyre. You know what the traditional form of a lyre
I
with
don't know. I'm sorry.
so the nyatiti has 8 strings. In the Bible, when they talk about King David playing a certain instrument, that was a lyre.
Okay.
Like lyres are what eventually developed into guitars and banjos and all these stringed plucked instruments that have, yeah. But so the nyatitis are kind of it has a resonator which is made from wood carved out of a log, and then it has 8 strings, and I'd say it uses a pentatonic scale. So it's most of the time when we learn how to, I'm learning how to play it the traditional way, and it has nothing to do with modern or European melodic scales. It's based on a traditional knowledge that's been passed down for a really long time, and that's what attracted me to it.
Fantastic. I mean, I've listened to some of the music that you sent me, and if I'm not mistaken, please correct me. But Nyakalaga Raw has a guitar type sound. Is that the lyre that you're talking about?
It's Bilane that has the nyatiti playing in it.
Okay.
There's the melody at the back. Tin, 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 tin. Yeah, Bilane is the one that has nyatiti in there.
Bilane. Okay.
Nyakalaga is a guitar. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, Bilane will be the one that people will have heard in the introduction, and I was thinking of doing perhaps playing a bit of Nyakalaga in the outro, so that people can also hear how you have fused the guitar into your work as well. But yeah, okay. Right. Yeah, so as you said, it's interesting as well, because when I spoke with Flora, because she talked to me about the work that she does fundraising for African parks, and she also talked about stories and storytelling, and it's kind of through that discussion that she said, well, actually, if you want to talk about storytelling, you really should talk to my brother. And so here we are. And yet one of the first pieces that I read about you was I believe an interview with another journalist who kind of introduced that you had just returned from the Somalian border. Do you want to talk about this event which occurred a few years ago?
Yeah, there were a group of artists and activists that I'd say that something really tragic happened at the border, which is that terrorists attacked a university and killed some students. And in general, there was this curtain of sort of like a lack of information. And the anniversary was approaching, and a group of activists and artists and institutions also felt that there hadn't been sort of a memorial event or anything said or done, a prayer, something done to honor the young people who fell, even though the government had proceeded to just do the usual security response. But there's this other part of the equation, I think, where it matters to say so and so fell here, so and so was innocent, so and so should be remembered. So yeah, courtesy of the institutions we were working with, particularly I think it was Heinrich Böll, the German institution. An event was planned that was like a commemoration, and it included also the creation of a memorial monument that had the names carved on it, which I think was the first time since the happening that something had been done to honor the students who fell. So yeah, I was part of a group of artists, photographers, writers, musicians. Just we were asked to accompany the group and to share. How do you say, to perform almost something like the rites of their passing. So we did an overnight vigil during which we definitely did some storytelling and played music and some poetry. And the next day there was this whole big memorial event, which unfortunately now was way more political than I would have liked to. But I feel like the part of it that I went for was the spiritual part, and I feel like that part was fulfilled. So that's the event I was coming back from when I met him, when he wrote the article. Yeah.
And also, as we were kind of talking a little bit before the podcast, you mentioned that this kind of, okay, here you are obviously saying that you weren't there for the political side of things, but that's your political work, or your political activism work was mainly before Corona, and that since Corona you've kind of changed direction.
Before Corona, the hub we were working at was both an activism as well as an art hub, and those two things came together in many ways within that space. And that's also, actually, it was as part of a group from that space that we had visited the university. But unfortunately, there was I think during Corona, a lot of funding for the arts dried out. A lot of art spaces weren't able to kind of stay afloat, and this particular place tragically lost their. They had a theater, they had a couple of floors and a rooftop, a really nice venue for artists to meet and do all sorts of art-related things. So they lost that during COVID. And when we came back after COVID, for a lot of artists, it was almost like coming back to find yourself sort of professionally homeless. And since COVID, it's been about trying to find new spaces, and about the old spaces trying to recover some sort of version of themselves, I think. I'd say for the arts, it's been a bit difficult in Nairobi since COVID, and maybe just for some part, because I can't say I'm experiencing everything, but for the part I'm experiencing, it's a bit difficult to get. It seems that, and then economies are also a bit on a downturn. Seems to me the arts always suffer first when that happens.
Unfortunately, it's one of those things. But also, it seems to me to be the case that, at least from what I've experienced here, that when there is a shortage of funds, then personal training, personal development, and these kinds of things are also cut. So it's very unfortunate, though, because in the kind of stressful, difficult lives that we face, people often find solace, and, as you mentioned before, the expression of spirituality through communal art, through music, through stories, and for these things to be cut, then a community loses an important part of itself. One of the themes that I believe is quite prominent, and I think I got this from a blog that you may have written, but
Yeah.
essentially the elitism, as it were, of English or foreign languages in African society. Is this a concern at the moment as well?
Consider it a pet peeve. You know, like a
Okay.
Consider it a pet peeve, because personally, I'm not very bad at using the Queen's language myself. You know,
I can hear that. Yeah.
In fact, I have to be quite decent at it in order to make a living as any type of artist. I think, especially a writer. But at the same time, one can't help. So let me tell you about growing up in primary school. Yeah, we had this thing called the disc, and basically, it was a form of punishment. It was a block of wood, usually shaped in a very uncool or ugly manner. And what used to happen is that in order for us to learn how to speak English properly, we had to be taught to look down on speaking our mother tongues. So if you were found or heard speaking your mother tongue, this block would be hung around your neck, and you would only get it off if you heard someone else speaking mother tongue, and then you could give it to them. And at the end of the day, they would follow the chain of people who had possessed the disc all through the day, and they'd be lined up and given a few strokes of a cane. So this is how we are taught English. This is how my generation is largely taught English, a bit brutally, you know. So yeah, maybe it's fair. It's just fair that I carry a little bit of resentment, especially because there are some people who kind of, after that, you would say, traumatic introduction to Western education, haven't been able to recover their mother tongues. I feel those are people who are almost robbed rather than people who are given a gift. It's unfair to only give a gift if something else must die, you know. So yeah, maybe that's the basis of this particular. You said, yeah, it's a feeling that I have expressed before. It's a feeling that I certainly carry. And even in my work, I do definitely dedicate work to the local languages. As you might have noticed, my music
yes.
is mainly precise. And also, I think the last 3 short films I did are also in the Doluo language. And I believe that, yeah, over time, more people and not less are going to want to switch to using and interacting in these languages. And also, what's funny is I think there's actually a depth of communication that my language at least can access that I'll find lacking in English. There are ways in which we use sound that English does not. I'll say, for example, something like intonation. I could say the same word and somehow let you know when I'm more worried about it. Like I could give it gradations of intensity, or of how, let's say, run, ringi. If I say ringi, it's casual, but I could say ringi and it's urgent. And I feel like English doesn't have any such flexibility with pronunciation. If you pronounce it wrong, the word is wrong and the sentence. But with my language, I feel that, in fact, I feel part of the charisma that people sometimes detect from people who speak my language when we speak English comes from that other language influencing it. So yeah, there's probably things that English cannot do that some of these other languages can do. Who knows what we are missing, relying so much on English and allowing it to kill off some of the other ways we used to communicate.
I can only imagine, and I share that. I empathize with the pain because I mean, when I heard the songs, Bilane in particular, but also Cinnamon, and I'm gonna completely destroy the pronunciation of, but Wamie Kodi. I mean,
Wamie Kodi. Let's dance with you. Yeah.
I mean,
these are yeah.
It's just fantastic. I mean, people will, I hope, come to hear them, and I will play. Okay, I'll have a couple of them here for this episode, but hopefully future episodes, then I'll also play some more because, I mean, as soon as my wife came home, I was like, "Look, come, listen to this," and she put on the headphones, and straight away she was like, "Yeah," she was into the rhythm, and I completely appreciate what you're saying.
Next time, record a video. I'll put it on my social media.
Yeah, I will do. But you're so right, because cult language. Because I'm ethnic Armenian, so the way that Armenian culture has developed over 3,000 years or so on. The music has a certain flow. It has a certain wave to it, and that wave is not reflected in other kinds of music. So culture develops over centuries, thousands of years in every culture, I believe, in every country. So your culture, which you express with your language, with your words, that can never be substituted with a language from another country. It's just not possible.
Yeah, that is true. That it's I think language is a store of a people's memories as well. I feel like so for example, there's a pretty famous container for carrying maize that has a name, Goro Goro. Like, that's the name of the container, but it's also used as a measure of grain in the market. So you buy grain by the Goro Goro. And with these kinds of, I discovered that this name might have originated from a great famine, a great period of hunger during which there was a lot of relief maize being distributed, and the unit of distribution was this Goro Goro, and it stuck from then on as the name of this implement that people used to. Now people measure everything in it. It's not just for maize, it's people measure charcoal, people measure fruits, people measure everything by the Goro Goro. And it comes from a period when people suffered greatly and needed to learn this word, So languages do much more for a people, and with the language as widely shared as English, it's difficult to, I think if English is the larger language in a land, it encourages the loss rather than the retention of that land's specific memories. English instead, I think, now attempts to international or global events rather than specific place events. So I think that as a language, maybe it's important for an individual, therefore, to keep their language and to keep practicing it, because it's only in practicing it that it keeps its value. And it's the practice of language as a ritual of self-affirmation and identity. I feel like it's important for people to keep their languages and some of the practices of old.
Have the practices that you mentioned, this horrific way of teaching English and unfortunately stomping on your own cultural language, has this changed now in schools, do you think, or is it exactly the same as it was when you were a pupil?
the current generation of students is lucky because even the law has shifted to eliminate corporal punishment from schools. But my generation wasn't so lucky because not only did the law still allow it, but I actually think it's one of those remnants of a very colonial way of looking at, the children of Africans. But I would say that the current generation of children are quite lucky, not just to have the law different, but to have us as their parents, who because our parents were not listening to any of this. They were going by the Bible, spare the rod. So the rod was not spared much. Yeah, by the way, it's funny. Christianity has a huge impact on life over here. It's just a thing.
As we were talking before about language, you also talked about how language in itself embodied the memories of a culture. And in that sentence, you kind of reminded me of another story of a novel of yours, Afropolis.
Well, there's this, I think the cool concept you're referring to is the main character, who is based on my own self, who is a collector of memories and who uses a specific digital device to harvest these memories. And what's even more interesting is that I find that character to be, in a way, perhaps I was trying to create a reflection of myself as a writer. I feel that maybe a writer is kind of the same thing. I'm still, the jury is still out in my own head on what aspect of the writing life I was trying to capture with that character. But it's definitely about how I think I made magical my job as a writer. As a writer, I feel that when I talk to people and they share with me bits of their life, the way that I eventually use these bits of their life within my literature and within different fictions is like keeping them in. It's like I preserve this piece of life. It exists within a story, and the story will live longer than you or I. So this thing that one person went through can become something that is that one person's experience can become useful for a larger collective.
Owing to some technical difficulties that we had on both sides, we then had to switch from our live discussion to a different process where I would send questions and Alex would then send me his response. So what now follows is that process. And the first question I asked him was, how liberating was it for you to write music in your own native language? And this is what he had to say.
I tried explaining this during our last conversation, though I think there might have been issues, and maybe you didn't hear me explaining it very clearly. I was trying to say that there might be some things that need telling in a language specific to a certain culture in order for the memory of that culture and the identity to not disappear. I feel that working in indigenous languages preserves the memory of indigenous cultures, and it does it in a way that is perhaps more secure than working in a more hegemonic language such as the English language. So that's the reason why I feel particularly privileged to be able to create music in my own mother tongue. And yeah, I still mix it up with the languages that you could say were taught by the system at the expense of mother tongues, because by so doing, I managed to make my music accessible to everyone who shares in those other languages as well. But intrinsically, I'd say my job as I see it is to contribute to the memory of my culture and my people. So working in my mother tongue is important for doing that.
What is the story behind Bilane?
Question 2. What is the story behind Bilane? I play a Luo traditional instrument called the nyatiti. And on one occasion, me and my music producer, a young guy named Abdallah Masood, we went to his studio. It's somewhere in Kibera in Nairobi. It's called Hitbox Studios. And we were attempting to use the unique sound of the nyatiti to create a work of electronic music. What ended up happening is that our experiment sort of failed. If we could give it a ranking out of 100, we got about 55, so it wasn't a satisfactory experiment in as far as what we wanted to create was concerned, but we learned a lot. And even more interesting is that one of the senior producers at the studio, Danville, was watching, and he listened to the product we made during this experiment, and I think it gave him some ideas on how he could use the nyatiti. So on another occasion when we went to the studio, he offered to help us make a beat using the nyatiti, and his expertise is a certain local flavor that has gengeton and a bit of kapuka sound, but adding the nyatiti to it gave it an even deeper cultural flavor by adding that element of the Luo traditional instrument. So, and the fact that all the three of us who are collaborating on the song are Luos made it also interesting in terms of the language. So that's how Bilane got made, as a second follow-up experiment to a first one that didn't do so well. And we really liked the sound of Bilane when it came. So that's why when you asked me to give you a sample of what my music sounds like, I shared it with you. But actually, that's not the final version that you heard. Think of it as this is actually the first time ever that Bilane is probably going to be shared outside of the people who made it. So yeah, there's a way in which this is a bit of a red carpet debut for for Bilane to the world. But yeah, and I'll definitely be trying to infuse this traditional instrument into more of my music after this. And big up to Danville from Hitbox Records for his contribution to the vibe. It's a classic party song, hedonistic excesses galore. If you get a translation, you'll understand, but the young people will definitely dance to that one.
In our podcast, Flora touched on this topic as well, but in your songs, I can hear combinations of languages. How do you learn when to infuse a certain foreign word into your stories for maximum effect? And is there a secret understanding for doing this?
Question 3. Is there a particular method or technique to mixing the languages? And my answer is, it's half method, half inspiration. Let me explain. I find myself using English for the last parts of the lines a lot of the time because I feel that it makes the rhyme scheme have a familiarity to people who, because, in terms of influence where hip hop is concerned, of course, a lot of the influences are the same. And where those influences are concerned, you could say I learned how to rhyme by listening to the hip hop greats. And so in terms of my rhyme schemes, when I choose how I'm going to rhyme at the end and I use the English, I definitely make it spicy in different ways to make sure that it's a familiar rhyme scheme. But the bulk of my content, though, that's delivered either in Dholuo or in Sheng or in Swahili. So essentially, it's 4 languages that I use, Dholuo, English, Swahili, and Sheng. And for each of them, there is no, I don't feel like I have if there's a bias, it's there for Dholuo. I would love for most of my music to be expressed in Dholuo. But all these other languages are a part of me. And honestly, when I write, I'm not really thinking about the languages that much. When I write, I'm just expressing how I feel. And yeah, turns out I have multilingual feelings, if you might put it like that. But yeah, half inspiration and vibe, half method. I would say that's the technique. This one is a bonus on my part because I remember specifically the question I was answering when the last conversation was interrupted by bad network. And I was trying to explain to you how I feel that perhaps a writer's job is to observe everyone and interact with everyone in an observation mode, as well as, being present yourself. There's a way in which you need to be a bit detached and observing yourself. And in so doing, you're able to take seeds of memory from each individual you interact with or you observe, and these inspire in different ways parts of your fiction. And so you could say you add to the collective memory what everyone has to contribute. You are some sort of a scribe for the culture and the collective that you belong to. And this is something that people try to do along the lines of cultural identity most of the time, but also religious identity and that kind of thing. So I consider myself a person writing into the historical memory of the Luo people when I create my stories and when I create my music. That's how I see myself. And yeah, I think that's what writers intrinsically might be meant to do. To sign off, I'd say I've really enjoyed talking to you, Zach. And I'll just make this last point. A favorite author of mine, author and thinker, Walter Benjamin, says, "The angel of time flies backwards into the future." And he paints this picture trying to describe how humanity experiences time. So when I talk of writing into the memory of a certain collective, adding to that memory through writing, but you could say perhaps I am writing what this collective refers to as it flies backwards into the future. I think contained within the writings of storytellers like myself are the seeds of how the future can be navigated, and these seeds are contained in the memories which we have preserved. So yeah, I'd say as a storyteller, that's how I see myself ultimately. Otherwise, I'd invite you guys to look up Omish Njash on all the different social media channels, especially Instagram and Ko-fi, as well as Twitter. OMISH NJASH. Also look up my official name, Alexander Ikawa. And Alexander Ikawa, you'll find me on X, formerly Twitter, as well as on Facebook. And yeah, I definitely would like you all to check out my Ko-fi page, ko-fi.com. Look for Omish Njash there. I keep a small running commentary on the work that I'm doing in the Nairobi art space. And for those who feel inclined, there's a little button you can press to buy me, as they say, a coffee, to keep these artists fed and able to create more art. Otherwise, it's been a pleasure, Zach, and I hope we can talk some more.
Two and a mic. Two and a mic. Two